Earlier today, I released a reaction video for the new trailer for The Chosen Season 4, which begins releasing in theaters on February 1st. Now I'm back for a breakdown of that same trailer, so let's get to it. Alright, first things first, before we actually jump into this trailer again, let me explain to you what I mean by breakdown. What I do not mean by breakdown is that I have watched this video a billion times, and I have skewered it for every single possible detail, and then I'm here to give you the definitive interpretation of this trailer, and I'm about to tell you everything that happens in The Chosen Season 4. That is not what I've done. This is literally my second time watching this trailer, the first time being whenever I did that reaction video on the previous video. So I'm going to watch this for the second time with you. What I mean by breakdown is that we're going to walk through it slowly but surely. I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to pause it, I'm going to share my thoughts, and then we're going to move on. That's what we're doing, and if that's okay with you, let's get to it.
Darkness is not the absence of light. It is more uncontrollable and sinister.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there and go back. So we start off with Mary Magdalene, right? And she's narrating over this whole thing. And she says that darkness is not the absence of light. It's something more uncontrollable and more sinister. I don't fully know what she's getting at there. But I think that... usually, like, what she's referencing is that, usually people say that darkness is the absence of light. Darkness is not in and of itself a thing. Darkness is simply the absence of light, right? That's kind of what that's referencing. I don't know if people were saying that back in first century Judea or anything like that. But that's what she's referencing. But she's clarifying it. She's saying it's not simply the absence of light. It's something more uncontrollable, something more sinister. And I think this is some place where we can kind of get into some biblical theology, right? Because we have to realize that whenever you're actually talking about darkness from a biblical perspective, this is a metaphor that is usually used a lot of the times to talk about the works of the evil and Satan and the devil and stuff like that, right? And so darkness is more than simply the absence of light, because darkness in and of itself, it includes the unknown, right? There's a reason why whenever we walk into a dark room, there's this sense of fear that kind of overcomes us, right? It's because it's more than simply the absence of light. It's the fear that there might be something sinister or uncontrollable beyond that, right? And so that's kind of what it's hinting at here. And I'm sure that the context that she says this in the actual trailer will actually kind of influence exactly what she's communicating. But that's what we hear her saying in the background. But then we open up with these shots of Jesus looking just like he's sitting in sadness, right? And it looks like he's near tears, which I think is going to be a very common thing in this entire season. I think that we're just going to see the opposition for Jesus increasing throughout the season in particular, because if you think about it, this is the middle season, right? We've got 7 seasons for The Chosen. We've seen 3 seasons, which are really the rise of Jesus. And then now we're going to be heading to the cross, right? Because this season really has to get us really, it's got to make a huge jump, right? Because to me, if you just watch the first 3 seasons, it seems like we're still dealing with the beginning of Christ's ministry. But if the theory, like, if what I'm hearing is correct, the way that season 4 is going to end is going to be like with the triumphal entry, right? With Jesus entering into Jerusalem for his last week before his death, right? So really, season 4 has to do a lot of work to get us from the beginning of Jesus' ministry to nearly the end, right? And so this is really going to be the meat of Jesus' ministry. And so we're going to see his popularity grow, but also opposition grow. And then season 5 will presumably deal with the last week. And then season 6 will somehow just deal on the resurrection. Maybe just that final night will be over the course of the last episodes. And then season 7 presumably is the resurrection, right? And so I don't know how they're going to do all that. But what I'm saying is that season 4 is going to have to deal with a lot. And so I imagine we're going to see a lot of tears. And I imagine that over the course of this whole season, we're going to see more of a dynamic between all of the just all the different characters, more than we've ever seen them before, because they're going to be fluctuating between highs and lows. That's what I imagine. And so we see Jesus there, and he's crying, right? But then we also see, here's Judas, right? He's drenched in water. I do not know why. Maybe it's just after, I know later in the trailer, we're going to see them like going for a swim. Maybe it's right after that. Maybe it was just raining. I do not know. I feel like I heard somebody talking about this scene in another video, from a few months ago, but I don't remember exactly what the context was. So we'll just move on here. So we see Judas and we see Andrew. This is presumably the same scene. Notice that he also looks kind of wet. They all seem like they're reacting to something negative. The lighting seems the same as this right here, but Jesus seems to be alone in this scene, whereas over here, it's all of them together. And maybe these scenes are happening at the same time and Jesus isn't with them. I do not fully know. But they're reacting negatively to some sort of news. Just because of the focus on Andrew here, I am going to assume, and I'm just going to take my educated guess here. I'm thinking that this might be when they hear that John the Baptist has been killed. Just because Andrew, we would expect for him to have this sort of reaction. So I'm going to assume that that's probably what's happening here. The rest of them seem shocked, but he seems like a man who's he's petrified in fear from this. So I'm assuming this is whenever they hear that John the Baptist is dead. And that could even be what Jesus is thinking about right here. And then you see some of the other ones. I mean, this is the new Philip, I believe, putting his hands in his hair. Matthew looks troubled as well. But once again, I just want to notice they're all wet. So this seems to be flowing from, they just got wet from something. I don't know what it was. I'm assuming it's the scene later on whenever you see them all jumping in the water. And then we cut right here, and this is still with Mary narrating. This is the scene with Herod Antipas whenever he's throwing a party and his niece dances for him, right? And I think this makes sense because if the previous scene was about John the Baptist's death, well, this scene is explaining how that death came about, right? Because what we're going to see is we see Herod Antipas, and they're having a great time. I'm assuming this is his wife, Herodias, and they're watching his niece dance, and he's going to be so impressed with it that he makes a foolish promise, and he says, ask anything of me and I'll give it to you. And she's going to be convinced by her mother to ask for the head of John the Baptist. And so that's what this whole scene is. And so I'm thinking that all of these clips revolve somewhat around the death of John the Baptist. That being said, let's hop back into it. So
it is more uncontrollable.
More sinister.
And sinister. You were there, waiting, because the darkness is not dark to you.
Okay, so she says, you were there waiting because the darkness is not dark to you. I'm assuming she's talking to Jesus. And this, to me, it actually carries some, John chapter 1 vibes, if you will, right? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, He was with God in the beginning, through Him all things were made, without Him nothing was made that has been made, in Him was life, and that life was the light of man, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I think that's kind of the imagery that Mary's going for here when she's talking about light and darkness. And John himself, in the Gospel of John chapter 1, he's calling back to the creation account in Genesis chapter 1, when in the beginning there was darkness and God speaks light into the darkness. And really what the whole Genesis 1 account is about God taking something uncontrollable and sinister and reining it into order, right? He's taking chaos and bringing it into order. That's what Genesis 1 is all about. And so it seems like Mary is doing what John is doing in the Gospel of John and using that dark and light imagery to convey something about Jesus, right? So Jesus is the light of the world. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that entire speech in this chapter, in this season, because just given the chronology of the story in the Bible, season 4 would be where that light of the world discourse comes in, and that would be at the Feast of Tabernacles, I believe, which is Hanukkah. And I believe that I've heard that they're celebrating Hanukkah in the season. So Jesus probably is going to talk about being the light of the world, and who knows, maybe it could be in response to what Mary is saying right here. But to go back, we see her saying this. We see this dude breathing fire. This is once again at Herod's party. And then we cut to Jesus standing here. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe this is him just off on his own praying after he's heard about John's death. But this really could come from literally any episode in the season. I do not know. But just look at those amazing backdrops of Utah. That's where they filmed this. I hate to break it to you. It's not filmed in Israel. But that's just a really beautiful backdrop and a beautiful scene. But Jesus by himself here, I'm assuming just in thought and praying. And then we cut right here. And this seems to be what I'm going to guess is Lazarus's house. And the reason why is because in a second we're going to see some people who are with him that seems to be some of these people are just disciples, right? This seems to be maybe Judas, that's Simon. I think is that Simon Z right there? I don't know. We got James, we got Nathaniel over here. And then over here, we can't tell from this angle who these women are, but if you keep going a little bit, right here, we see some more, right? So we see that this is Mary Magdalene, and this right here is Mary, the sister of Lazarus. And what I'm assuming is happening here is I'm assuming this is the scene where they are over at Lazarus's house, and Mary and her sister Martha are tending to Jesus, right? And as you'll see, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus here, which Martha is going to gripe about, right? So Martha's going to gripe and say, how dare Mary be sitting here and leave me to be doing all this stuff? Whereas Martha is over tending to Jesus, and Jesus is going to say that Mary is doing the better thing, right? And so he's actually going to praise Mary for sitting here and learning from him. And then in the background here, you also see Andrew, Matthew, and then you see Lazarus, right? And so I'm thinking that's what scene this is going to be right here. And so, yeah, that's all I've really got to say in regards to that. And then we keep going. We see a zoomed in shot of Lazarus. And right here, we just got to realize that I think this is setting up, I imagine this is going to be earlier on in the season, and it's going to be paving the way for Lazarus to die later on, right? I imagine that maybe early on in the season, they'll meet with Lazarus, they'll hang out with him, they'll leave, and then they'll receive news that Lazarus is sick. And then I'm assuming for the back half of the season, they're going to come back and he's going to raise Lazarus and then shortly afterwards enter into Jerusalem. I think that's kind of how they're going to fit the chronology here. So we see Lazarus laughing there, Jesus smiling, and then we have them approaching here. And I think this is where I stopped it a second ago. But where they're approaching is they're approaching Caesarea Philippi, right? So they are in a vastly different place than they were in the last shot. Because in the last shot, they were down in south in Bethany, right? Which is near Jerusalem. Now they're way up north. They're in the region of Caesarea Philippi. And this is where we're going to see some really cool stuff happen. This is where Simon Peter right here, you see him right next to Jesus. He's going to make his confession, right? Jesus is going to say, who do people think that I am? And people are going to say, some people say Elijah, some people say so-and-so, some people say so-and-so. And he says, but who do you say I am? And Simon will say, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus will respond to him and say, flesh and blood has, like, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That all takes place at Caesarea Philippi, right? That's what we're about to see whenever it cuts to Caesarea Philippi in a second. But one thing I want to highlight is it seems like the whole posse is here, right? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so 10 of the 12 apostles are here, and then you got the women as well. Who are the ones who are missing? Is Andrew? No, Andrew's there. So we got Simon, Andrew, James, John. Judas is not here. Oh, no, yeah, he is. Judas is right here. 2 of the apostles are not here. I don't know which ones they are. If somebody wants to go look, and then in the comments let me know which ones they are. I'm not going to waste our time right now. But here they are showing up here. And they're going to be here for the whole event. There's also another event that I'm just really hoping they'll do, but I can almost guarantee you they're not going to do it. But if they do, I'd be really happy. While they're in Caesarea Philippi, most likely this is the time whenever Jesus is going to go up the mountain with Simon, James, and John. And he is going to be transfigured, and his face is going to glow and all that stuff. And he's going to talk with Moses and Elijah, and it's going to be a really cool moment. I hope that they show that in the show, but I know that Dallas has said that he tries to stay away from too many special effects. He doesn't want people to be removed from the story. And so, if anything, we might see a moment where, like, James and John and them, like, they're coming down from the mountain, and they're like, hey, you'll never believe what just happened. It was awesome. But we might not actually see it. But that would happen while they're up there, if that is going to happen. And so, let's pick up from right there. Let me rewind a little bit and click play.
Dark to you. At least, not always. The coming darkness was too deep for us to grasp.
It would appear that we now want the same thing as Pilate.
All right. So Mary said, the darkness is not dark to you, and at least not always. And the coming darkness was it was too deep for us to grasp. This makes me think that we might get a flash forward in this season. Just because the way that she's talking here, the coming darkness was too deep for us to grasp. It sounds like a future Mary talking about past events, right? Which is interesting. It makes me wonder what they're going to do there, but I wouldn't be surprised. Also, even the way that Mary's talking here, it sounds more mature, right? It sounds like somebody who's had a lot of time in reflection who's looking back on this. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we get a flash forward, and that's what this narration is coming from. Or else maybe they just had Liz Tabish, like the lady who plays Mary, maybe they just had her do a voiceover for the trailer, but I'd be surprised if that was the case. I don't know. But then we cut, and this guy right here, I don't think we've seen him before. I am assuming, and I could be wrong here, this could be, I know that we're going to see Caiaphas, the high priest, in this season. I wouldn't be surprised if this is him. I know that they've showed who the guy is. I don't keep up with the behind the scenes stuff. And so it's very possible that this is the guy who plays Caiaphas. Unless I'm mistaking him. Maybe he is somebody we've seen before, but I don't believe so. But what he's saying is that their goals and Pilate's goals seem to line up, right? So let me just replay that part.
It would appear that we now want the same thing as Pilate.
It would appear that we now want the same thing as Pilate. I'm assuming that this has to do with Jesus, right? I mean, it could just be a bait and switch where they're talking about something different, but presumably this is setting up the greater conflict here. It's not that Pilate wants Jesus dead, and it's not that they want Jesus dead. I'm assuming that their ultimate goal is for peace in the land, right? That's probably what he's talking about. And we might even have Caiaphas say the famous line where he says, it's better that one man die for the sake of many than that all the people should perish, right? And so that could be where Caiaphas is setting that up, or whoever this Jewish leader is, if I'm mistaken and it's not Caiaphas. It could be setting up that line, right? We and Caiaphas want the same thing. The Jewish leaders and the Romans, from their perspective, they both just want peace in the land. Pilate doesn't want conflict. They don't want conflict. They want to work with the Romans. The Romans want to live in peace. And so that seems to be what that is probably alluding to. And then we cut to Pilate and his wife here, and Pilate looks a little bit more distressed than I would expect. He was more of a snarky character back in season 3, but he seems a little bit more distressed by whatever he sees going on here. I don't know what it is. And then we see his wife just kind of looking on as well. So I don't really have much more to add to that. But I just love the set designs of all this. This is just so beautiful. All right, let's move on.
That we now want the same thing as Pilate.
Senior leaders in every district should question and expose Jesus.
Okay, so senior leaders in every district should question and expose Jesus. This is something that we see happening in the Gospels, right? In the Gospels, we get to see that one of the common tactics of the people who were opposing Jesus was to question him and try to get him to trip up in his words, right? And they wanted him to trip up in his words so that they could hand him over to the authorities, and therefore the authorities could have him put to death, so that this didn't turn into a thing that was blown out of proportion, right? But also, even beyond just this is more from a villainous perspective here. This was a common practice amongst Jewish people, right? Whenever a new prophet or a new religious leader showed up, they would often try to question them and ask them difficult questions just to see whether or not they were truly from God, right? And that's actually what the scriptures tell you to do, right? Is you want to test the spirits. But the Gospels make it very clear that there came a point where the religious leaders were not doing this out of genuine curiosity to see whether or not Jesus was from God. There is this step that they took when they were actually malevolent and they were actually trying to take Jesus out. And that seems to be what Caiaphas, or whoever this religious leader is, talking about. He's saying, so senior leaders in every district, their goal should be to try to trip Jesus up. And so here we see Jesus preaching, and I'm assuming that maybe one of these religious leaders back here is going to question him. And then we just see it from the same other angle right here, right? This is the same shot. Like if you look right here, you get to see religious leader, that one Roman dude, I forget what his name is. And then you get to see like little James and Mary right here. And then if you cut to right here, it's the same shot, right? Little James, Mary, and I forget these two guys' names, but we've seen them before. I'm blanking on their names from right now. All right. And so we see that, and let's click play again.
Question and expose Jesus.
I just can't stop seeing how we could be doing things faster and more efficiently.
You deserve a stipend for your specialized work. You can.
All right. Now, this is something that made me super excited watching the trailer for the first time. We got this shot right here in the teaser trailer, right? But here we're getting more context. We're getting to see the fall of Judas, right? Here we see some religious leaders looking at Jesus, and we've seen these guys before, right? They're curious about Jesus, they're concerned, and then it immediately cuts from them to Judas, who also seems concerned, right? So it's kind of just, this is like really expert like filmmaking, right? To where just like, if I just want to kind of geek out of this. So you've got, the religious leaders who are enemies of Jesus in focus, with Judas being blurred out. And then as the religious leaders get blurred out, Judas comes into focus, right? And it's almost like this kind of the handoff of the baton, right? You've got the animosity towards Jesus being passed from the religious leaders into Judas, and then in the narration that you have in the background, you've got him voicing his concerns to Hadad, right? His former business partner, who we know is more of a swindler, right? And Judas is basically complaining about Jesus, saying he should be doing things faster. He should be doing things like this. He should be doing things like this. And then Hadad tells him that he's not being given what he deserves, right? So we have these seeds of doubt being planted in Judas. I'm excited to see how they go about this. I did talk about this in my reaction to the teaser trailer a month ago or whenever that was. I think it's unfortunate that Judas was introduced so late into the game. Because we didn't really get to meet him until the end of season 2, and we didn't really get to know him until throughout season 3, and then now in season 4, we're already getting to see him fall away. I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity in the show, because man, I think it would have been so cool if we just had longer to spend with Judas before seeing the cracks in the armor, if that makes sense, right? I would have loved to just like get to know him, how we've gotten to know a lot of the other apostles, and just get to spend more time with him at the front of the show so that by the time we actually saw these cracks showing up, it would be more heartbreaking. And I think it's still going to be sad, but I feel like just having watched season 3, we still haven't gotten enough time with Judas to really see, well, like to really feel the impact of this, right? Like so far, really in season 3, Judas has been a pretty distant figure, right? I mean, he's sent out on the 2x2 mission with the rest of the disciples whenever the only sermon he's ever heard is the Sermon on the Mount, right? And so he hasn't really gotten to know Jesus as much, and he spends a lot of time away from Jesus. And then in season 3, one of the big issues that the disciples are having is that Jesus is barely ever around, right? And so Judas hasn't spent a lot of time around Jesus, and so we haven't really gotten to see that connection between him and Jesus or him and the other apostles. By the time season 3 ends, he still feels like a newcomer, right? And I think that's a bit unfortunate, because especially when you get to like the Last Supper account in the Gospels, right? The Gospels don't tell us a lot about Judas, but when you get to the Last Supper account, one of the most striking things to me is that whenever Jesus says, "One of you will betray me," like all the apostles, they deny themselves, like they doubt themselves before they doubt Judas, right? It's not like anybody just looks and says, "Oh, it's obviously going to be Judas." No, Simon Peter says, "Is it I, Lord?" Matthew says, "Is it I, Lord?" James says, "Is it I, Lord?" Right? They're asking whether or not they are going to be the ones that betray Jesus, which implies that they had such confidence in one another's faith that they doubted themselves first. And I would love to see that sort of bond between the apostles and Judas here, because I think it would make it that much more heartbreaking whenever he does fall away. And maybe we still, like, I think we're going to see both sides in this in this season. But this trailer is giving us a heads up as what's to come, right? And so it seems to be here, just given the background, that they are in the temple, right? It seems like this is the temple complex in the background, and that Jesus teaching here. Maybe this is during the Feast of Dedication, I don't know. But we get to see Judas, and he's concerned, and then he's voicing those concerns to Hadad, who is a businessman, right? He does not seem to have a spiritual bone in his body, and if he does, it is simply because he's using spiritual stuff for personal gain, and he's telling Judas that Judas deserves more, which then allows us to cut to Judas here, and if you remember back in season 3, he was put in charge of the purse, in charge of the money, and now what we see is he's looking at the money, and then he slips it into his pocket, right? So he takes it out of the purse and gives the money to himself. So that is not a good sign for Judas Iscariot. Let me rewind it, and let's get going again.
I just can't stop seeing how we could be doing things faster and more efficiently.
You deserve a stipend for your specialized work. You can at least make sure that you have resources to keep the mission going.
All right, so one thing I just want to highlight, he said, I can't stop seeing ways that he could be doing things faster or more efficiently, right? So specifically, the issue Judas has is that he thinks that he knows how Jesus could do it better, right? Jesus is not going as fast as he wants it to go, and he thinks that if he were in charge, he could do it better, right? He can't help but see ways that this could be done better, right? So Judas is looking at this in a very proud way, and rather than submitting to Jesus and his leadership, all he can do is see issues, and that's really, it seems to be his concern. He can't help but see this, right? No matter what he's doing, he can't help but notice the flaws and the differences and how he would do it versus how Jesus would. So he's really just failing to submit. That really seems to be the key issue. Then we cut to Quintus here, who is also going to have his own set of problems, as we're going to see.
My ledgers are in the red. I told you to make life difficult for the followers of Jesus.
So that's an ironic thing. So Quintus is yelling at Gaius here, and he's mad because his ledgers are in the red. And that's because, if you remember at the end of last season, Quintus told Gaius to do whatever he could to get rid of the pilgrims and do all that stuff and make things difficult for Jesus. But Gaius is having a huge change of heart, right? And so Gaius, as we know, he's going to, or as was hinted at the end of season 3, he is going to be the centurion who asks for his servant/son to be healed. They're actually combining two different stories from the Gospels into one story in Gaius. And so Quintus is getting mad at Gaius because Gaius is not responding as he should, But then ironically, look at this. Like, once again, the way that they edited this trailer is fantastic, right? So Quintus is getting mad at Gaius for not making things difficult for Jesus. But then you cut immediately to the temple where it's the religious leaders who are making things difficult for Jesus. And you have the apostles fighting back here. And I'm hoping that this is going to be the scene in John chapter 8 where Jesus is preaching in the temple and they get into a debate about Abraham. And Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And then they get up and they try to kill him and then he escapes. I'm hoping that's what scene this is, but I don't know. What's interesting to me here is how empty the rest of everything is. Like, I would imagine there'd be a crowd everywhere, but for some reason it's like there's just like this group of people right here and like just these apostles. It seems like if these guys are trying to get past them, they could easily just run around. So I don't know what fully is happening in this scene to justify like the spatial use, but I don't know. It's a really cool shot though.
To the followers of Jesus.
Okay,
It is
Caesarea
on
Philippi.
this rock that I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.
All right, that's so cool. So this is just something where, like, I've been to Israel 4 times, right? I went back in 7th grade, and then I went in, like, 2018, or I went back in when I was in 7th grade, a long time ago, and then I went once in 2017, 2018, and then recently I just went earlier this year with my friends, Brandon Snipe and Brandon Robbins, right? If you know their YouTube channels, The Snipe Life, and The Chosen Sleuth, and Brandon Robbins' YouTube channel. And I've been to Caesarea Philippi every single time I've gone there, and they have recreated the set in a super awesome way, right? So whenever you go to Caesarea Philippi, they've got like maps and stuff and like hypothetical drops of what the place used to look like. It doesn't look like this now anymore, right? There are no temples there or anything. But the way they've recreated the set is amazing, right? So right here, I really love this shot right here. Okay. This is really cool. So they've literally gone all the way to even put these like inset like idols right here. And when you go to Caesarea Philippi to this day, and you can go look this up on Google, in the sides of the cliff, they still have these little inset places where they used to place idols, right? And so the way that they've designed this is so cool. Like, where Jesus is standing at right now is a place where I have stood at with my friends whenever we've gone to Israel, right? It doesn't look like this anymore, but literally exactly this place. Like, if you go look at my vlogs that I made from Israel this past time, Brandon Robbins was doing the teaching at this location, and where Jesus is standing at right here is the location where Brandon Robbins was doing his teachings about the gates of hell and Caesarea Philippi and stuff. So it's actually really cool. If you just actually go look at that footage and compare it to this, they just recreated the set in an amazing manner. And I think it's even really cool that they painted the temples, because usually whenever we think of the temples, we forget that, like, even like the statues and stuff that we see in like Roman art, we usually forget that they were probably painted originally. We just think of them like as white statues, but in reality, they were probably painted. And the same thing with the temples. I think it's cool that they went into that amount of detail, and the way that they made this set is just fantastic. And I think a lot of it's CGI, but still so cool. And so here we have the event. You'll notice that Simon Peter is standing right here, and I can call him Simon Peter now because as of this story, he will be called Peter. Right? If you go into the Gospels, Simon was actually called Peter very early on whenever he met Jesus. Like in the Gospel of John, it's literally John chapter 1. Peter meets Jesus for the first time, and he says, your name's going to be Peter. Right? In The Chosen, they've kind of decided to do it a little bit differently, and he doesn't call Peter Peter until this scene right here. And it's going to be at Caesarea Philippi. I've already talked about it before. This is whenever Simon confesses Jesus as the Christ, and then Jesus changes his name to Peter, which comes from the Greek word Petros, which means rock, right? And so here we see, like, it's just amazing. Like, I just love the set design. But we get to see the 12 disciples here. We get to see, like, this is all the same group that we saw from earlier whenever, like, they were showing up on the ridge of the mountain. And then we get to see other people watching from a distance. These are all probably pagan worshipers. And a fun fact about this place is that behind this temple that you see to the left here, right? So if I'm zooming through it, if you go to this shot right here, there's a temple over here, and then there's a temple immediately to the left where Jesus is pointing with his hand. Jesus is pointing to his right, which is our left. If you look in that direction, behind this temple, there is a cave, and that it's a deep cave, and people would call this cave the gates of hell, right? And so it's really cool whenever Jesus says the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He's not just talking about his kingdom. He's really talking about the kingdom of the world will not prevail against the kingdom of heaven, right? That's really what he's getting at here. And once again, if you actually want a more in-depth teaching, Brandon Robbins did a fantastic job explaining this in our trip to Israel. And so you can go look at those videos. I included some of it in my vlogs, and he might have the full thing on his channel. I don't know. But there's a whole lot to unpack behind this, and I imagine it's going to be really cool how they break it down in the show. But I'm just so amazed by the set design and all the stuff that they did there. It's just really, really fantastic. I also just want to highlight the wardrobe changes that a lot of these guys have gone through. Some of them are wearing the same stuff that they've worn before, but some of them are also wearing something vastly different. I just think it's so cool that we're going to get to see them interacting with the Greek and pagan world. Because that's the thing. Most of the stuff that we've seen in The Chosen so far has been dealing with stuff in Judea and in Galilee, which are predominantly Jewish, right? I mean, Galilee is a little bit more pagan than Judea is, right? Because Judea is literally the center of Jewish practice. And as you get further away from there, you get a little bit more pagan. But Caesarea Philippi is up in the north, right? And it's literally at the head of the Jordan River and stuff like that. And so I think it's going to be really cool seeing how Jesus interacts with that stuff. And I hope that we even go even further north and maybe see the story of the Syrophoenician woman and stuff like that. I don't know if we're going to, but this would be the place where they do it. Just really cool stuff.
Shall not prevail against it.
This infernal chaos.
Okay, so right here, we see Jesus and his disciples walking. And I'm assuming that this is whenever Jesus and his disciples are beginning their way down to Jerusalem, right? If you read the Gospel of Luke, this is actually a good portion of the Gospel of Luke. They call it the Lucan travelogue. It's really just this long journey of Jesus going with his disciples down to Jerusalem for the final week. And I don't know if we see the shot in this trailer, but I know in the teaser trailer, you saw this shot of Jesus walking ahead of them and all of them walking further behind. And that's because that's a specific detail that you read about in the Gospels where Jesus is walking ahead of them and they're walking further behind because Jesus, he's heading on, he's going forward into Jerusalem.
Shall not prevail against it.
Yeah.
This infernal chaos. Why can no one control these people?
Okay, so I don't know who this guy is. Maybe it is Joanna's. Maybe Joanna has a husband. That's Joanna right there. We met her in season 3, episode 1. But this guy seems to not be happy about whatever's going on here. And I'm assuming that this is going to come from episode 8, right? Because you see them grabbing palm branches. I think that they're probably preparing for Jesus' arrival, but there is another thing they could do, right? Since they might be celebrating Hanukkah in this season, there's a possibility that they could explain the palm branches by explaining the Maccabean revolt in the Feast of Dedication. Because one fun fact is that whenever Jesus entered in on a donkey into Jerusalem and people were waving palm branches, that was actually a callback to the Feast of Dedication, right? If you actually read the story of the Maccabees, whenever they had victory over the Seleucid Empire and they rededicated the temple, this gave birth to the Feast of Hanukkah. Whenever they rededicated the temple, they rode into Jerusalem and people waved palm branches before them. And so in many ways, waving palm branches before a conquering king, it was a way that the Jewish people, they acknowledged rededicating God's city to God as a result of victory over pagan oppressors, right? And so whenever the Jews are welcoming Jesus into Jerusalem on a donkey and they're waving palm branches, they're actually calling back to that story. And they are expecting Jesus to come deliver them from the Romans in the same way that the Maccabees delivered them from the Seleucids. And so them plucking the palm branches here, this could be in episode 8, shortly before the triumphal entry. But if I'm correct, and we're going to be celebrating the Feast of Hanukkah at some point in this season, it could be an opportunity for them to explain that ahead of time so that there's greater weight behind it when you get to episode 8, right? And so we get to see that this is in Jerusalem. People have palm branches. They're all waving them. But they're not waving them before Jesus here. This is not Jesus on the donkey. This is just, I'm assuming the conversation we're seeing here with Joanna and whoever she's talking to, they're entering into the city and people have palm branches before them. I don't know why, but I'm assuming that probably this is episode 8. And I imagine that they're having a tough time getting in. And that's because everybody else is heading out to welcome in Jesus. That's just kind of going to be my guess. Also, I just want you to notice how the stuff that Romans have set up over here, like the idols, right? The Jews would have hated this stuff, but once again, amazing set decoration.
Infernal chaos. Why can no one control these people?
All right, So the guy said, "Why can nobody control these people?" And then it cuts to Jesus holding Mary, his mother's hand. I'm not sure what they're doing here, but I'm assuming, I think this is the same clothes she's wearing at the end of this trailer whenever Jesus starts crying. I'm assuming that this might be whenever they're heading down to go see Lazarus, because I'm going to assume that that's what was going on there. But it says, "Why can't anybody control these people?" And then it immediately cuts to all of the disciples wearing Roman garb. And you might wonder, why are they wearing Roman garb? This seems to be a reference to a practice that Romans could do, where Romans could demand that Jewish people carry their stuff for a mile, right? You could say, "Hey, you random Jewish person, you do this task for me," and they could have them do it for up to a mile. And this is where Jesus says, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, go with them too, right? I'm assuming that's what's going on right here, where the disciples have been forced to carry the stuff for the Romans. But as you can see, they don't seem very happy about it. And so Jesus might come in and give them this teaching afterwards. I don't know. I don't see Jesus in this scene, but maybe he is doing it as well. But it makes for a really cool shot. I mean, they use this for the thumbnail, and I'm actually using it for the thumbnail for this video as well. But it's a fun shot seeing the disciples wearing Roman outfit stuff. I just think that's kind of funny. And so we see them doing that. And then this is the scene I'm talking about whenever we see the disciples all running in to the water, right? And what's interesting is that it's not just the men, the women are jumping in there too, which honestly, if I'm being like, that's wild. It makes me wonder why they're doing this. It makes me wonder if they, like, it looks like they're doing it for fun, but the fact that the men and the women are all running into it together makes me think that they might be doing it out of fear, because I cannot imagine a context in the first century Jewish world where like men and women would be jumping into a pool together to goof off. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I don't know. Let me look at this again and see if I can kind of piece it together. Yeah, it seems like they're just having a fun time. We get to see, like, it seems like this is the new Philip, new Philip. It seems like he's waving people on. But right here, notice this seems to be John and I don't know who that is, but they seem to be carrying James. And I know that James is going to get hurt, right? We're going to see that in just a second. James is going to get hurt at some point, and it seems like they're carrying him. And so maybe it's something related to that. I don't know. This is a very interesting shot to me. I've probably lingered way too long on it, but there's something going on there.
What just happened to all of you? It's about to get worse.
Yeah, so this is where, so Zebedee tells the brothers, what just happened to all of you is about to get worse. And here you see James, he's beat up pretty good, right? He's got like some blood right there. And in the previous shot, he's getting bandaged, right? And so we don't know exactly what happened. I'm guessing that this shot happens before the last one, because he doesn't have a bandage here, but he does in the previous shot. James is probably going to attack somebody, or he's going to get hurt while being attacked. But we do know that there's the shot from like the last teaser trailer and stuff, and I think it's in this trailer as well, where James is like drawing a sword. The disciples are going to have to figure out how to handle opposition, right? And they presumably had to learn how to handle that a little bit when they were on their mission in season 3, but they're going to have to learn more about it here. And so Zebedee's just warning them, it's about to get worse. And this might even set up and actually I just noticed that John's pretty cut up as well. But this is hopefully going to set up the encounter between Salome, James and John's mother, with Jesus, where she asks him, can my children sit at your right and left hand once you establish the kingdom? And Jesus responds and says, can they drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And she says, yes. And then he says, okay, well, I don't decide who sits at my right and left hand, but they will share in my cup. And really that's ultimately talking about the persecution that is to come. And so I'm hoping that that's what that's setting up.
Worse.
Now that I'm here, physical death does not interrupt our eternal life.
Okay, so Jesus says, now that I'm here, physical death does not interrupt our eternal life. And we have shots of Jesus walking with a big group of people. I mean, look at that. You got the apostles. You got Tamar. Tamar's been at like the front of a lot of these shots. They seem to be emphasizing on her a lot. You got a huge group of people behind him. And then it cuts to him comforting little James and Thaddeus. I don't know what about. Actually, I think that this was a scene that was released before. I just never watched the scene, so forgive me. Y'all probably, if you've seen the scene, you could probably tell me what this is about, but I'm pretty sure they released the scene before where it had Jesus talking with them. And then you have Matthew, and is that Okay, so Matthew seems to see Jesus healing somebody. I'm assuming that this might be blind Bartimaeus or something like that. Because if Jesus is going to be heading to Jerusalem, and if the season is going to end with a triumphal entry, then he's probably going to pass through Jericho, and he's going to have to heal some blind people. But this also could be the story, just because Jesus has his hands on the guy's eyes. I think they might be combining some stories here, where Jesus takes mud off the ground and puts it in the guy's eyes to heal him, right? But no matter what, I think that this shot right here is Jesus healing a blind man, which is actually pretty cool. Like, if you just think about the imagery here, you've got this blurry shot of Jesus, and then Matthew is watching it in detail, right? Even though Matthew is not the one who recounts this event in his gospel, it's just the idea of like the evangelist watching this with clear vision, right? Like, so the gospel writer watching with clear vision, while Jesus is like blurry, kind of like how the man would see him, right? Because the man is blind, and so he's coming into sight. And so I'm reading way too much into that, but in the account, Jesus says, "Can you see?" And okay, sorry, I'm just like, I'm getting way too into this. But whenever the person talks about seeing, he talks about seeing people walking around as if like they're just like they're blurry, right? So you could read a little bit into this, like, just shot. I don't think that's what Dallas Jenkins and the creators were going for. But if you wanted to, you could argue that's what they were going for.
Physical death does not interrupt our eternal life.
Okay, physical death does not interrupt our eternal life. And here we have them rolling the stone before Lazarus' tomb. It also gives us a little heads up as to what the tomb of Jesus might look like, because it's very similar to rich man's tomb. Lazarus was a rich dude. And here we have Simon, Andrew, Simon Z, and who is that? Is that Philip right there? Philip or somebody is helping roll the tomb away.
Our eternal life. Lazarus, come out!
Okay, Lazarus, come out. You go back here, you get to see that Mary and Martha. There's Mary, there's Martha. They are clad in their black mourning clothes. Actually, it looks like very cool material. I kind of like the outfits. And then you have James in the background here. He's bandaged up. So whatever happened recently, because opposition is growing. You also have religious leaders in the background watching all this go down. And then Jesus says, "Lazarus, come out." I'm really looking forward to this whole thing. John chapter 11 is a great chapter. There's just so many cool interactions. Like, I can't wait to see Mary and Martha's various interactions with Jesus and stuff, where Jesus says, "I'm the resurrection and the life." That even could be whenever Jesus says, "Now that I'm here," like whatever the phrase was he just said, that might be taken from his conversation with Mary and Martha. And then he says, "Lazarus, come out." And then look at that. You see this little movement right there. There's Lazarus in his grave clothes. Boom, right there in the corner. All right.
Come out!
Remembering wishing there could be another way. And
Okay, notice, so she says, I remember wishing there could be another way. So this definitely seems to be Mary talking in the future. I don't know when. Maybe this is, it'd be really cool, is if this was a flash forward to like after the death of Jesus, right? But before the resurrection. That would be so cool, right? It could explain how the darkness was ever like too much for Jesus until he died, right? And so maybe like this could, I'm just kind of getting excited about it, right? And so I remember wishing there could be any other way. Like, she knew that he had to die, but like they're in that state where she's like mourning. That would actually be really, really cool if they did that. But so she says, I remember wishing there could be any other way. And here we have John ripping the doors open. And Jesus is the one carrying. Look at that. So we got Simon, James, and Jesus. So James and Simon are the ones carrying. Jesus and Simon are the ones carrying James. Very interesting.
remembering wishing there could be another way.
All right. Right here we have. Okay. I think this might be what I was talking about. I think this is a flashback. I think this is a flashback to the Maccabees. Oh, that's so cool. Just looking at the design and stuff, I think this is a flashback to the Maccabean revolt, right? So this is going to be a flashback, not to the Old Testament, but to the time period between the Old and the New Testament. And I think we're going to see the Maccabees riding into Jerusalem with palm branches being waved before them. I think that's 100% what's going on right here. That just made me so much more excited for the season. So cool. Yeah, I can guarantee you that that's like Judas Maccabee or something like that. And you even have like this is very cool. Very excited about that. And then it cuts to Jesus walking, and then Jesus praying, right? So, all right. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's at the Feast of Lights. I don't know. Okay.
Another way. And looking back, I do too. I still don't know why it has to be this way. The bitter often mingled with the sweet.
I still don't know why it has to be this way. The bitter intermingled with the sweet. All right. So let me go back through those shots. Let's just look what we got. So we had Jesus praying with the disciples, right? And that seems to be 3, 6, 7. So this is the 12 disciples plus the women. It's interesting how much they have the women with them the whole time, because there really doesn't seem to be a distinction between the apostles and the women in the chosen universe. Then you have James attacking somebody with a knife and John trying to stop him. And I imagine this is the event that's going to get them hurt. And then you have John the Baptist being marched in custody to go die. And there's the chopping block where he's going to have his head put down. And this is going to be the last room that John the Baptist ever sees, which is really sad. I'm assuming that's the executioner in the background right there. Oh, and then look at that. Even in the right hand, you have the silver platter right there. I wonder if they're going to show that or not. That'd be kind of gruesome. But yes, there's the silver platter that John's head is going to be put on. Then we cut here, Jesus entering into the temple. I'm assuming this is during the Feast of Dedication, where he's going to talk about being the light of the world and stuff like that. And then you have the disciples running, and I'm wondering this is... That's too quick of a shot. I don't know what's going on there. They're running somewhere frantically. I'm wondering if this is after the event with James, because it seems like Matthew might be helping carry what appears to be... Oh, Matthew is helping little James go quickly, right? If you see that, Matthew and Thomas here, they're helping little James move pretty quickly. I don't know where they're heading, but they're heading somewhere to rush. Here you have Mary falling on the ground before Jesus, crying out to him, probably after Lazarus is dead. And then you have Jesus getting ready to weep, right? And then we're going to cut to this right here, which I'm assuming is the same moment. So let's see what it says.
You told us it would be like that. With how you lived.
All right. So you told us it would be like that, by how you lived, like this, the bitter intermingled with the sweet. And what we see here, I think, is once again the death of Lazarus, right? I think this is the shortest verse in the English Bible, Jesus wept, right? So you have everybody looking at Jesus, and they're trying to figure out how he's going to respond. I just want to highlight Judas's hair looks amazing right there. Go Judas. They're all looking at him, and then it cuts back here, and in the background you see Mother Mary, and then you see this appears to be Martha in her mourning attire, right? Her like grieving clothes, and then Jesus is going to break down weeping, right? Wow, even Thomas is wearing different clothes here. Interesting. We don't really see him out of those like that kind of rainbow colored tunic. Okay. And then Jesus just breaks down crying, right? And so I'm assuming that's the phrase, Jesus wept. And then Mary holds him.
Acquainted with grief.
Yeah. Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And look at that. In the background, you have Mary and Martha grieving. So once again, I think this is the Lazarus moment where it's Jesus weeping. And then Mary's comforting him. And then Mary Magdalene, over the narration, says, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, which is a reference to Isaiah 53, setting up the death of Jesus.
Acquainted with grief.
The Chosen, Season 4. In theaters, February 1st. Tickets on sale now. All right, and there we have it, boys and girls. There is our breakdown of the Chosen Season 4 trailer. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I did. I probably talked way longer than I needed to, but you know what? What's new? I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you're looking forward to the Chosen Season 4. Just breaking down this trailer did make me a little bit more hyped, actually a lot more hyped. And I hope that you are as excited as I am to actually get to those episodes so that we can talk about it more on this channel. Yeah, if you want more Chosen content, this is the place to go because I break down every episode super in depth. I talk about the biblical stuff, what's not biblical, and I try to be very sober-minded in our approach to it. And if that sounds good to you, then join the family. Thank you all for watching this video. My name is David Tate. This is Now Let's Be Honest. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. Remember who you are. And of course, Maranatha.